Welcome to Broadband Action, the C-Band podcast. I'm Curtis Dean, your host. Back after a bit of a hiatus, quite frankly. This guy's been so busy since February. I haven't been able to roll out a podcast, but I'm really glad to, as we get back into the groove here, I've got a fascinating guest and a fascinating topic. So we're going to be talking today about Althea. And joining me is Deborah Simpier. She is CEO, I believe. Is that right, Deborah?
Yeah, I'm the CEO of a company called Hawk Networks that built what is Althea, and so I consider myself to be a co-founder of the Althea platform.
And we'll talk about the relationship between Hawk Networks and Althea here in just a second, because Althea is really kind of an application that is being used to deploy fixed wireless networks or fiber networks or any other kind of network. And Hawk Networks also builds those types of networks. Did I say that right?
Yeah, that's right. We sort of think about it like the relationship between Red Hat and Linux. So Althea is like the operating system. It's a routing and billing protocol. And, Hawk Networks is the one that kind of helps support the implementation, all the tooling, helps people set up Althea networks, or we run our own, and so that's kind of how that same Red Hat is Hawk Networks, Althea kind of like Linux.
Gotcha. That's fantastic. So here on this podcast, we talk about all topics related to digital equity. And one of the big inequities in America today is broadband access. And that's really where you guys are filling a gap. So if you could maybe kind of start at the beginning, how did this come about? How has it evolved?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I'm going to take y'all back to, 2016, 2017, Oregon, little town, just like many towns in or communities across the U.S. Didn't have very good internet access. But we saw some granting here. So there's around 1,000 people. There was about $1 million grant to provide, broadband access. But like the same outcome that we see over and over again, you do get some build out of that grant money, but it still leaves so many behind as the providers of broadband really focus on where they can get the kind of most economic benefit for their one, fiber optic cable or deployment. And then because it's so siloed, it creates artificial dead ends. And so then all of the other folks around didn't have internet access. And, we see this in even the broadband mapping that just sort of came out. You'll see a bunch of green dots and a little cluster of homes that are connected. But right around that, you'll see all these little red dots in proximity. And these are all these people that are left behind. So we really started looking at network building and really solving the digital divide from a systemic perspective back in early 2017, and that's really where the Althea protocol came about. Is like, how can we leverage the assets that already exist in a community? How can we create sort of more agile, resilient routing and remove these artificial dead ends? And that's really what Althea was set out to do, and now is in 10 U.S. states, been deployed in 4 countries, and has solved the digital divide for many different settings, whether that's urban or rural or emerging market or whatever that looks like.
Wherever there are or underserved people, right? Essentially. And we talk about served does not necessarily mean there's no broadband there, right? It just means that maybe the broadband is something they can't afford, or otherwise available to them, or they just don't want to do business with some big, huge mega corporation that doesn't even know who their customers are.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting statistic, and it's that 72 million Americans, which is roughly like 1/3 of us, use prepaid phones. instead of, doing a phone on a contract. And I think that's really indicative of the fact that, the sort of monthly contract with a credit check and, having almost like a utility bill isn't really accessible to a large segment of Americans who maybe don't have access to a bank. I mean, if you go into many of these areas where people are experiencing poverty, they're not banking at a traditional bank. They're banking at a check cashing or the gas station or whatever else.
Right.
And these are the same folks that are now being precluded from accessing broadband just simply because of the way they bank or all of that. So I think, when I look at who my target that I'm trying to reach when I talk about digital inequity, I'm thinking about that 72 million Americans who are using prepaid phones. Those are most likely the folks that, Detroit, for example, 1 out of every 4, 24% of Detroit does not have access to internet at their home. So this is not necessarily just a rural problem. A lot of it's also MDUs where, hey, fiber to the curb, fiber to the building, but that copper wiring inside the building, or we've come in the coax, there's bird nests up in it.
Oh, and, Lord, yes.
So, the infrastructure is all kinds of states of things. But the reality is we can keep throwing money at it. We've thrown a lot of money, I think somewhere in the order of $100 billion over the last 10, 20 years. Or we can solve the real systemic issues and put money to work in better, more efficient ways.
You guys are really kind of reinventing the model for what a telecommunications company can and should be, right?
Well, that's the idea. And I think that's part of the reason why it's, we've had there's so much of the foundational elements we've had to sort of redo, all the way from, creating an agile routing protocol. And one thing that's really interesting about the way that we do routing is we actually weight it by price. It's called a price aware routing protocol. So anyone that's part of an Althea network. So if you have Althea at your home, you'll see on your dashboard, you'll have a slider bar. One side will be cost and the other side will be quality. And this is like a latency selector. And on a minute by minute basis, you can decide which you want to weight more. If you want a more cost effective connection, you want a better quality one, and it'll route through the internet based on your choice on a minute by minute basis.
Wow.
And then
what's interesting?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry I did interrupt, but that sounds like what long distance telephone companies have been doing for years and years and years. They call it least cost routing. It's what's caused a lot of, unfortunately, issues in the broadband or in the telephone space. But I would think you guys are doing it with a lot more intelligence, and you're letting the consumer choose that least cost route as opposed to mandating it upon someone based on the company's profit motives.
Well, that's right. And I think that's really where we're trying to shift the balance of power back. And then the other sort of piece of it that's really crucial is that as it routes through the different connections, it automatically pays people who are hosting a tower or a mile of fiber or have infrastructure. So in many of our communities, that might be a tower at, that's on a farmer's home, or it could be at in one community, it's at the library, right? Or a municipal building. And then those folks are paid just sort of programmatically. So it allows the community to benefit and keep that money local and build much more efficiently. Not only, and then also kind of shifting the power back to consumers to choose on a minute by minute basis, which is really, we got the idea for this based on how carriers charge each other at the internet exchange. So all the way back in the, then you have peering and there's a lot more flexible models. You have this meet me room, everyone comes together, and you have a really open market that has created cost pressure downward. So year over year, the last 20 years, costs have gone down. Year over year, bandwidth capacity has gone up at the internet exchange. But that hasn't translated into this at the last mile. So Althea's really the thesis is that, hey, we can take that model that's working really well for carriers and apply it all the way down to the last mile. And now we're tackling IoT and cellular as well.
Absolutely. So the consumer can benefit from those cost efficiencies, not just the provider's bottom line.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I want to work through a scenario with you, because this is a scenario based on an actual person who is a C-band member. And I think I may have referred them to you, but I just kind of want to do a little thought exercise here. So I live out in the middle of nowhere, Iowa. There's no broadband. I can't even get any existing wireless services because I'm in a valley, and me and my neighbors are all desperate for broadband. And by golly, I just think I want to solve this problem. It sounds like for someone like that, or some group of people like that, that working with you guys might be a great approach as far as building your own little micro network.
Absolutely. And that's really what we kind of work on at Hawk is we take, essentially the Althea's kind of broadband Legos or bricks or whatever, that these tools, and say, okay, let's look at your topology. Let's look at where you might have middle mile. Who can we partner with? And, do a lot of that, the heavy lifting on the planning side that comes with that expertise in telecommunications and infrastructure, and then help that community, use these tools to solve that. Which usually, means working with a middle mile or a utility or someone else who might have connectivity nearby. Yeah. Sometimes it even means like working with a timber company or something, or in Iowa, you're not going to have that, but you have a co-op sometimes that'll
lots of farm elevators out there. Yeah. And lots of them some of those are the primary vertical assets for some of the existing wireless providers that are out there.
Yeah. And a lot of what we're doing right now too is also building basically private 4G, 5G networks for farms to, be able to have their connected automated vehicles and things like that. And then that also can be used to connect broadband in their community too. So it's has that multi-purpose.
That is huge in the ag belt, and a frequent source of complaints from people working in the ag industry that I can't get broadband where I need it, which is on my tractor in the middle of a 600-acre field, and cellular coverage being what it is. So it sounds like you guys have been involved in solving for those problems as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's such a critical issue now as you have more of an aging farming population that's going to be more relying on automated vehicles. We also see a lot of monopolization kind of coming in from John Deere in that. So this really brings that sovereignty of networking and data back to the farmer, who now can set up their own network and bring that data back to their own computers and use that for what they need it to, or as well as, automate the farm and, provide connectivity and be a piece of that. So it's that, and this is why I sort of love like working with rural folks as well too. It's like part of that local solution.
Well, and rural folks have had to be very creative over the years. They're not afraid to usually think outside the box because they've had to for generations in order to sustain their livelihoods, their lives, their families, etc. So, one of the things that's interesting that you're able to do through Althea as that kind of operating system that I think is really fascinating is lower the barrier for entry, because a lot of times the telecommunications networks don't always scale very well, right? It may cost so many dollars per connection, but and that may not be a lot different whether it's 5 or 100, but some of the infrastructure, the administrative infrastructure you need behind that to make it work just does not scale. A traditional OSS BSS system for a fiber network or a billing operating system for fixed wireless is going to cost you thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars. And it looks like, because you guys are using blockchain for this, I don't want to get into the weeds on blockchain because I would be lost in those weeds, and I'm sure our listeners would too, but you're using the intelligence in the network to help control that and also to make sure funds are transferred to the people that earn them.
Yeah, that's right. And really what it is it's about flexibility. So it allows, essentially what happens is machine to machine payment. So as that is getting routed through, it's essentially paying people programmatically. It's a bit like solar systems that, if you put solar on your roof and you're contributing back to the grid, you get some money back off your bill. This is a bit basically like how that works in just a real programmatic way. So you just deploy the infrastructure. You don't have to worry about sending someone an invoice. You don't have to worry about, okay, I paid them this much. It all just happens, sort of automatically. That also allows, I think that's kind of what we're working on right now, is it also will allow for different funding methods because you can crowdsource or lend or borrow against that revenue that you know is going to be coming, programmatically. And that's what I'm really excited about right now. We've spent a lot of time working on tooling for builders, and now we're kind of looking at, okay, now how do we match the builders with the funding? And that's really where we get those economies of scale. And so we can take these community models and start kind of federating that and almost and really start scaling things now too. But Hawk also does do a lot of the planning and expertise bit that makes it kind of hard to scale as well.
So give me an idea of a range of size from like the smallest network that you guys are involved in to the largest network in terms of like customers or premises served.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think we're still pretty kind of like early. So most of like the rural networks are going to be in the 150 to, couple of hundred range,
Right.
And then, the urban ones, we've been fortunate to work with some nonprofits to, build in some of the urban areas. And those are kind of just getting started, but they're going to be around like, around 1,000 a piece or something.
Okay.
Like that, right. So we're still kind of getting started right now. I'm excited about getting that funding in and really kind of pouring some gas into these networks.
Absolutely. Well, there's no doubt the need is there. And, that's what we as a nation have been built on, is innovators like you guys identify a need, serve a niche, and then are able to grow from that. So I think you position yourselves really well to be able to do that.
Well, yeah, we think we have a basically an addressable market that's 72 million people that are using those prepaid phones. So
that's right.
I think, there's a lot of folks to serve.
Well, if someone who's watching or listening today wanted to find out more information, how would they get a hold of you, Deb, at Althea?
So, so the Althea site, althea.net, is mostly about kind of the protocol behind things, but you can find us also at Hawk Networks. That's like the bird, hawknetworks.net. And there's a contact us form. We'd be happy to help, support your vision. I
just showed the web address for Althea, but I'm going to change that now so I can show Hawk Networks. What states are you actually currently active in?
So
I don't want to test your memory here, but
so we have 10 states. We are in Illinois and Indiana, Washington, Oregon, California, Montana, North Carolina, Texas, and Georgia. I think that's New Mexico.
New Mexico too. Okay.
Yeah. And
you're spread out. I mean, it's not just one little area. You're coastal and you're on the other coast, and
Yeah, and that's actually in terms of like our core infrastructure, that's allowed us to essentially create a backbone of also service and the kind of internet exchanges. So if one region fails over, and so we've got a pretty darn good foundational core network as well that people can connect and tap into.
And what is your background personally, where before this brilliant idea came up that you helped put into practice?
So
telecom geek?
Pretty much. I would say radio nerd, but I think that's pretty much the same vein. Ham radio operator, building like mesh networks. I was involved in advocacy and activism for freedom of the internet, just sort of connecting neutrality and making sure that people had not only access, but they were not censored or throttled. And that's when I, got a little bit frustrated by that, but kind of on a policy perspective, and switched to a systemic one, which I think has been better for me. But I also ran a IT and MSP business for about a decade.
Great. Well, you're doing good things, and really appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your busy day to talk to us about this. Hopefully I'll get to run into you again at future conferences. You usually are at Mountain Connect, I believe, so maybe I'll see you there. If not, somewhere down the line, we'll run into each other, and we look forward to hearing more as you guys continue to grow and keep solving for better broadband for more people.
Appreciate it, and thanks for the work that you do getting the word out.
Absolutely. That's Deborah Simpier with Althea/Hawk Networks, and I put is that the right address? I think I put the right address on the screen. Awesome. Appreciate taking the time. We want to thank everybody for joining us here on Broadband Action, and we will see you back here next time.